have you ever chased a dragon? And by that I mean pursued a risky venture voluntarily and got a little bit more than you bargained for. Yeah. How did it go? I saw a couple hands raised. Okay. On the night of June 1st, 2011, on the edge of the continental shelf, I found myself at night face to face with the most dangerous of all sharks, the oceanic whitetip, the shark of the World War II sea disasters, and this is exactly what I wanted. How did I get there? It began with a corporate downsizing, knocked me out of my ordinary world. I needed a change, so I decided to take an adventure. I gathered a team and we did the first ever night dive outside of a shark cage with multiple oceanic whitetip sharks in history. This was the last dive that was left undone with the marquee dangerous sharks. My inspiration for this dive was a man named Peter Gimble. He did the granddaddy of all shark documentaries. I don't know if anybody here has heard of Blue Water White Death, The Search for the Great White Shark. It's a film that came out in 1969. It was one of the films that inspired Jaws. So in 1969, Peter Gimble and his team left their shark cages to swim among hundreds of oceanic white-tip sharks underneath harpoon sperm whales. That ended up being the signature scene of the film, even though they found white sharks at the end, because the people were exposed, they were vulnerable. Well, Gimble regretted that he didn't leave his shark cage at night. He told author Peter Matheson, who recorded his words, he said, "I regret now that I didn't. It would have made all the difference in our night sequence." And it turned out that 4 decades later, still no one had done that particular dive. Where did it lead? Well, it led me to meet surviving members of Gimble's team. It led me to meet members of the Jaws team. And it led me to meet survivors of the USS Indianapolis, men who had faced this shark under dire circumstances, including the oceanic white tip. The horror for the Indianapolis began on just after midnight on July 30th, 1945. Over the deep waters of the Marianas Basin, the Philippine Sea, 2 torpedoes slammed into the starboard side of the ship. Twin blasts radiated outward, shearing off the bow and blowing a hole underneath the forward turrets. Seawater rushed in, the moving ship scooping water by the ton. 12 minutes later, a mile from where it was hit, screw still slowly turning. The ship rolled onto its side and began to sink at the bow. The stern rose high, bobbed there for a time, and the ship began its descent 3 miles to the ocean floor below. The Indianapolis was already guaranteed a footnote in history. The ship and their crew had delivered the bomb, the atomic bomb, the Hiroshima bomb to Tinian. And then the tragedy came for the crew. 1,196 men had been aboard the ship when it was hit. Perhaps 900 survived the sinking. 400 may still have been alive when they were finally spotted from the air after 4 days adrift. 322 were rescued. 317 survived. One of those survivors that I met, Richard Hale, and I learned, had joined the Navy at 17 in order to avoid being drafted in the Army. In order to avoid being drafted in the Army at 18. And this was born from his interest in the sea and also his plans to survive the war. The Navy was the safer bet. And a few months later, he found himself adrift, held afloat in the end by 3 soggy Kapok life vests. He had been in a group, he'd been in the water, he'd been a group of 80 people in the beginning, and by the time he was rescued, there were 12 left. So Richard told me about his 3rd day adrift, and he said, and hopefully I'll get his words right, he said, "Well, I figured it's only a matter of time. They're going to get me or I'm going to give up or something. I didn't give up, but I thought I would crack. I would drink the water," as he said, I'd drink the water, or a shark would get me. I didn't give up in the terms of giving up, but I didn't think I was going to make it, because men are dying all around you, and I figured, hell, I'm going to be one of them too. Richard would not talk about his experience for 30 years. When he finally did talk about it, he, like many of the other survivors, anchored on a simple message: never give up. And he told me, he said, I've got letters from school kids in a box, and people ask me, why do you go to school to talk? And he said, well, you read those letters, then you'll know. Because my theory is not giving up. I had trouble when I come home with my family and myself, that I never give up. It'll carry the rest of your life. You know what I'm trying to say to you? When my adventure became the cornerstone of reinventing my career, I asked myself, what does never giving up really mean? And while it's easy to understand in Richard's terms, in the terms of survival, what would it mean in terms of other things, no matter the scale of the of the challenge? Because as I found that reinventing my career came with its own style of challenges, trying to move forward when it was easier to move backwards, I had coined a term tongue-in-cheek. I called it how to never give up without going Ahab. And you may know Ahab. He's the Captain Ahab he was the guy who pursued the great white whale in the classic novel Moby Dick. Well, his vengeance was reprised by Quint in the movie Jaws, and Quint being the fictional USS Indianapolis survivor who spoke to vengeance, whereas most of the survivors had taken to silence. But I thought about it, and I thought about his message, and I looked and I saw that my own career had traces of Ahab. When I got out of the Army, I pursued lofty goals when I still believed that I could do anything. And one of those first assignments, what anything was the first time, was a new business assignment in New York City, where I was going to attempt to succeed where 11 other sales representatives were failing. And 2 of us sold anything that year, so our reward was we got a chance to do it again the next year, but for half the commissions. The other 10 were sent packing. And so what did I do? I tried again. It went poorly. This was my first experience in business with what I called the wall, the impossible goal. And I knew that in my own life I was predisposed, I didn't know it at the time, to charge walls. It probably didn't help that in my own experience in the military, my mission, had the big one happen, would have been to fight Soviet tanks and artillery from an unarmored Humvee, and later to parachute into Norway, assuming that country was going to be overrun. Neither of these scenarios played particularly well in the war games. And I also think about my senior quote where I said, never say it can't be done, because anything is possible if you give it your all. Noble, perhaps. True, absolutely not. And so I realized that I had learned the lesson on how to succeed, or what I could do to succeed, years before if I was only willing to listen. My Army CO once gave me and my team of 5 others a very simple mission. The mission was to take a 2.5-ton truck and push it many miles down a dirt road on the clock, get it up onto an airstrip, and across the finish line. What I didn't know was the purpose behind this mission. The purpose behind this mission was to see how I and my team would handle failure. Because no team in all the years of this exercise had ever gotten that truck up over the lip that surrounds the entire airfield and onto the airstrip and across the finish line. But I had insight that no one else had. I knew from working out by pushing my pickup truck around an open field that your legs are a lot stronger when you kind of get on the bumper and extend versus trying to do it the traditional way of getting behind it and pushing. So I got my team on the front bumper of that truck, and we got it up over that lip so easily, we had no idea we were supposed to fail. So what did I do with that insight? For the next 2 decades and a few more years, I went right ahead charging walls. And then I met Richard. And I asked myself again, what does it really mean to never give up? I remember what he had told me about his time and never giving up from his experience being in the water and also his life afterward. And I realized that never giving up means three things. The first is survival straight up. The second is justice. And the third is ambition. Richard, however, his experience was driven by misfortune. Mine and Ahab's were driven by choice. But each has one thing in common. Each offers a chance, if there is a chance. Because truth be told, sometimes there isn't a chance. So never giving up guarantees nothing. But it does offer a chance if there's a chance to be had. And in more dire circumstances, perhaps it offers hope. So I thought about the challenge that brought me to meet Richard. And what happened to me is my industry changed after the financial crisis, so I had to reinvent myself, make a new career. So what did I do? Well, I gathered a team, got together, and we went and did the first night dive among multiple oceanic white-tip sharks, the most dangerous of all sharks, the shark of the World War II sea disasters. And it kind of worked out. But after that, I finally thought about that truck. And it's not that I wanted to pursue easy tasks. Nobody had gotten that truck up that runway for years. But I wanted to pursue tasks that were easy for me, where I could do the seemingly impossible and still succeed, and where the prospect of giving up no longer loomed so large. And that's what I wanted to share tonight. Thank you.